The House comes to questions for oral answer. Question number 1. Point of order, the Honourable Jerry Brownlee.
Mr Speaker, I want to raise this matter now because it concerns the general sort of view around question time being a time when the opposition parties are able to hold a government to account. In particular, I want to talk about the question number 3, which the government sought to transfer to the Minister of Revenue. Mr Speaker, we did that on the basis that Speaker's rulings 1671, 1675 and 1765 all make it extremely clear that a question should be addressed to the Minister primarily responsible. Now that's a two-way street. Not only should it be primarily addressed to that Minister, but should also be answered by a Minister who can most reasonably provide the answer. Mr Speaker, in this case, the Minister of Finance has no direct responsibility for tax law. The question itself goes to the heart of tax law. Further, Mr Speaker, to those Speaker's rulings that I've mentioned, there is a number of rulings, 1683, which prescribes pretty much how the official side of the House should deal with such questions. And what's concerning us, sir, is that in not allowing this transfer today, effectively 1671, 1675, 1683, 1684 and 1765 are swept aside. And I think, sir, it opens up the very fine line between an opposition party seeking information on a genuine basis to inform the public and simply making a political point. And it would be unfortunate, sir, if the new ruling that's bound to follow this decision today falls in favour of the latter. But, sir, I just record that we are very unhappy about this transfer. We do not believe it is in the best interest of the House and the people who should be informed by question time.
To the point of order.
I will hear from Grant Robertson.
Mr Speaker, the matter raised in the question is about a specific report, the taxation of multinationals, dated the 15th of August 2013. I note that the recipient of that report is the Minister of Finance. Hang on. The question, as fast as I've seen him move ever. The question was set down to the Minister of Finance asking whether or not he had read that report. He is the only person who can answer that question, whether or not he had read the report and whether he signed the recommendations. I do note that I'm, in full disclosure, that the report also went to the Ministry of Revenue, but that is not the Ministry of Revenue we currently have. It was addressed to the Minister of Finance. He is the only person who can answer the question.
No, I will hear from the Right Honourable Winston Peters.
Brownlee's argument, the primary purpose of tax law is to set the rate, and that is most definitely in the Minister of Finance's purview.
I will allow one more contribution from Mr Brownlee, and then I want to tidy this matter.
Well, Mr Speaker, responding to the comment by Mr Robertson, there are a lot of ministers who have correspondence addressed to them without the responsibility specifically attached to it. I think that is quite common. In the case, sir, of associate ministers receiving general correspondence about a particular portfolio, but not having that particular delegation. Mr Speaker, also I'd point out that the question being asked by Mr Robertson asks, did he undertake a particular course of action? That, sir, is the point where the ministerial responsibility is not exercised. The government has, I would hasten to point out, no problem answering this, very straightforward, but it is a principle of how transfers can be done in the future.
I thank members for their contribution. In quoting a number of Speaker's rulings, Mr Brownlee is correct in that in most cases it is the opportunity for the government to transfer questions where it feels that answer would be better given by the Minister for Primary Responsibility. In this case, I did invoke 1683 and not allow the transfer because of the very specific nature of the question. The report to which members are alluding to, I have a copy of. It is a report prepared by IRD, Inland Revenue, and Treasury. It is clearly addressed to both ministers and the recommendations that flow from the report were then to be signed by both ministers. Mr Robinson's question does not want to know whether Mr Woodhouse, as the Minister of Revenue, received and read the report. He quite specifically wants to know whether Mr English received and read the report and then took action with the recommendations. Because it is a joint report to both ministers, I determined that the only person who could satisfactorily answer the question that Mr Robinson has raised was the Minister of Finance, and on that basis I did not allow the transfer. Question number 1, Andrew Little.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Does he stand by all of his statements in relation to tax havens?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr Speaker, yes, and in particular my statement from Question Time yesterday when I said, quote, it is ridiculous to suggest that New Zealand is a tax haven. We have a strong tax treaty and information exchange network that helps discover and prevent tax avoidance through exchanging information between tax jurisdictions. New Zealand has also been a very active participant in the OECD and G20 work to combat tax avoidance. We continue to be a strong voice in this area.
Supplementary.
Supplementary question, Andrew Little.
When he says New Zealand has, quotes, full disclosure, can he confirm that he means a system where foreign trusts do not have their names revealed in a public database, do not have their trustees or settlers revealed in a public database, and do not automatically supply any financial information to the government?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr Speaker, full disclosure isn't that something's on a public database, is that that information is available. The I-607 requires that the trustee is listed, that the trust name is listed, and if any one of the 40 countries that we have a tax agreement or the 11 that we have a tax information sharing agreement want to come to New Zealand and ask for further information, we supply that. In fact, actually, 20 jurisdictions have done that and we've supplied it. And in the case of Australia, we automatically supply the information to them.
Supplementary.
Supplementary question, Andrew Little.
When he says IRD will supply information to any country that asks, can he confirm that governments other than Australia cannot get any information at all unless they somehow know the specific name of the trust and that those trust names are themselves secret?
Well,
the
Mr.
Right
Speaker,
Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, if a country for which New Zealand has a double tax agreement or alternatively have an information sharing agreement, that sound like we're being attacked by drones.
I'll have that
anyway.
sorted out as quickly as I can.
Oh, okay, yeah, all right. Okay, so Mr. Speaker, if any one of those, oh, I think it's a bumblebee actually. I'm about to deliver the sting. If you give me 2 seconds.
Order. Now, we'll just continue with the answer to the question without interjections.
Okay, Mr. Speaker. So if any one of those countries that we have an agreement with comes to IRD and asks for the information, we'll supply it. Of course, it's for the individual country itself to decide what disclosure regime they want to have. If they ask for the trust information as part of their declaration, then actually they'll know the name. It's up to them to decide what they want to know.
Supplementary.
Supplementary question, Andrew Little.
Isn't the truth that his weak rules on foreign trusts mean enforcement agencies have no idea which of the 12,000 secret trusts are being used by wealthy foreigners for tax dodging?
Mr. Speaker, I'd best sum it up by saying this. The government has sought to develop policy that works for all concerned, one that enables New Zealand to cooperate with other tax jurisdictions while not disrupting the legitimate financial transactions of foreign trusts. Mr. Speaker, those words came from Michael Cullen when he put together the legislation that, might I add, Mr. Speaker, that we're talking about now, that was voted for by not just by Labour and National, was voted for by New Zealand First.
Supplementary.
Order. Supplementary question. Order. I have called order, Sue Moroney. I expect it. Supplementary question, James Shaw.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So if, for example, a Russian oligarch wanted to hide assets in New Zealand, in a New Zealand foreign trust, could Russian tax authorities obtain full disclosure of the details if they did not know the name of that trust here?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
I can't tell you whether we have a double tax agreement with Russia. I'd need to put that question down to the Minister of Revenue.
Supplementary.
Order. 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 Supplementary question, James Shaw.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Is the Prime Minister saying that co-advisory partners in Auckland, members of the New Zealand Institute of Chartered Accountants, are wrong when they conclude that, quote, New Zealand is actually a tax haven, at least in respect of certain trusts, end quote?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, in my opinion, yes, for a number of reasons, not the least of them being the arbiter of whether there are reputational issues here is the OECD. They have not raised any issues in this area with us, and in fact, despite what Labor said in the House about the OECD not giving New Zealand a clean bill of health, that is completely wrong. New Zealand was rated. See, once again, you're wrong, Grant. You make things up. New Zealand
Prime Minister will resume his seat. The question's been answered right at the start.
Supplementary.
Supplementary question, James Shaw.
So is it not true that the same OECD report that he was just quoting, saying that New Zealand had a clean bill of health, also warned that improvements were needed around trusts with non-resident directors and assets, and that nothing has changed in the 3 years since that report?
Speaker, the Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Speaker, that's not correct. The advice I've had is that the OECD related a few minor points, not specifically related to foreign trusts. They were raised, and those have actually been addressed.
Supplementary.
Supplementary question, James Shaw.
Is he not concerned that on his watch, New Zealand is building a reputation as a sunny place for shady people?
Mr. Speaker,
the Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we have in New Zealand followed tax rules which have been around for a very long time, since 1988. The disclosure rules that came in, brought in by the previous Labor government, are robust. We are part of the OECD and other organisations that look at these areas. As I've said publicly over the last few days, if there are recommendations made either as part of the BEEPS work we're doing with the OECD or others, New Zealand's quite happy to adopt and accept those. But we have full disclosure to anybody for whom there has an agreement, and it won't matter how many times the opposition say we don't. We do, and we've provided it to 20 jurisdictions.
Order. Supplementary question, Andrew Little.
Mr. Speaker, why do foreign trust owners deserve more secrecy than New Zealanders who own shares or are company directors?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we have tax rules in New Zealand that were established for foreign trusts that, as I quoted earlier from Michael Cullen, were, and I quote again, the government's proposed foreign trust policies in another area where we've worked extensively with effective taxpayers to produce good, workable tax policy. Mr. Speaker, there's nothing wrong with a foreign trust operating in New Zealand. We have a disclosure regime, and we're more than happy to work with, and are working with, the OECD on its base minimisation policy.
Supplementary question, Andrew Little.
Isn't the truth that wealthy foreigners take advantage of the special treatment to dodge tax at home? And the truth is, he doesn't worry about that one little bit.
Mr. Speaker,
Right Honourable Prime
this is
Minister.
fundamentally incorrect. Firstly, we are following the rules established by the rules established by the Labor government, voted for by Labor and New Zealand First. Secondly,
Order. There is no point in answering the question asked by Andrew Little when I'm getting that sort of barrage from the front bench of the Labor Party. Order. Supplementary question, the Right Honourable Winston Peters.
Prime Minister, if our tax laws are, to use his words, world-leading and right, why is he blaming the last Labor government?
Well,
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, if they're not, why the hell did he vote for them in 2006? Your law.
Order. Order. My patient. They're on their way. My patience is weakening on this particular side of the House. If I've got to specifically name people and ask people to leave, I will do so. It would be with reluctance. Supplementary question, Andrew Little.
Mr Speaker, if there is full disclosure as he claims, can he tell this House which trusts are being used to dodge taxes, which trusts are being used to launder money, and which trusts are being used to hide stolen assets?
Are you right, Honourable Prime Minister?
The members posing hypothetical assertions.
Question